Okay, so today we're going to do something. Oh, I will just wait a second for Melena to sit down. You want to tell them a funny story?
No, why?
Okay. Oh, it's not showing. Laptop. Can I just ask, so I sent you all the exam and the model exam paper. Are there any questions about that? Did everyone get it? Yes? Makes sense? Fair? I realized I didn't put the marking, like the marks that I should have put on there. So I just made it up basically, based on how I could break it down, but it doesn't really matter because it's not worth anything, but I'll make sure I put marks on it for the final exam. The final exam, just someone was asking about it. It's going to be 2 hours. It's open book. It'll be in a room, a different room to this, and it will be similar sorts of questions. And I'll again give you another model paper to learn from, yeah, to practice on.
Will it be like the same, how we like kind of emailed you the way, or was it be like a typical like online exam where you open it up on the iPhone page, you know what I mean?
So I'll explain my thinking about that. Is that this course is not being offered again because of various restructures. Yeah? So there is, for me to go and do all the iLearn layout is just like remarkable amounts of investment of time and energy when there's 11 of you, right? So it's much better for me to just put it on a Word document and send it back to you. You know, it's an open book. There's no chance of cheating. I think it works, unless you've got some really amazing desire to do it.
I like the way you did it.
Oh, okay. Does anyone have any really want to request to be an online exam?
But if someone again accidentally emailed us to everyone,
Akbar, if you accidentally email it all to everyone? I'll just say clearly you didn't copy him because he got a higher mark than most of you. So I don't think it matters. You're all pretty honest.
Yeah.
But will the uni or faculty okay with online exam to do everything on Word documents? I remember usually accessible work has to be on iPad.
So no, what it is I mean, I guess the other way I could do it is rather than having you type it, I could have you write it out by hand, right? So yeah, but your handwriting is horrible, I'm sure. I think that the only question is integrity. The main university rule is different. The university rule you're talking about is that all assessments have to go through Turnitin that are written ones, because that's where people cheat, right? They go and get people to write them, or they copy their friends and they submit the same thing, and that does a comparison of every single document in the world with every other single document in the world. So yeah, I just can't see how you can cheat if no one's seen the exam and I'm watching you all while you've got it, right? It's not logical, unless you're all sitting there on WhatsApp or something with each other. I shouldn't give you ideas. I didn't mean to do that. Okay, all right. Anyone else? Any other questions? Oh, were there any? Okay. All right. So the way I've been juggling around what to cover in these last couple of weeks on logistic regression before we go through to. So we've got 3 weeks. We've got week 10, 11, and 12. And the way I've finally settled on dividing it up is that this week we're going to do logistic regression, which is when you've got a binary dependent variable. Did someone get pregnant or not pregnant, dead or not dead, cured or not cured, etc. Right? These are the so we're going to look at logistic regressions, which is, I'm sure, how many of your actual models are logistic regressions? A few of you. One. I think there's another one who's got a logistic regression.
Yeah, I realised this I was doing the reading.
Yes, right. Yeah, you've got. Oh, this is a logistic regression. I think yours is a logistic regression.
No, it's linear probability. He it explained why we
Did it?
didn't do logistical product. Picked probability instead.
Okay.
So that's what I did.
That's why, even though I corrected you and said, you don't do that.
Yeah. So no, sorry, yeah, I'm doing it.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. It doesn't really matter. I mean, do what the people in your paper did, but just to know that logistic regression is probably even more sexy than linear regression a lot of the time. Like, because it actually, one of the things that people like about it, the mathematicians and the statisticians and so forth, is it makes less assumptions. It's much, and in that way it's more robust in general. So I can't really go into exactly why that is the case, but linear regression, for example, assumes that it's going to move, like it just makes a hell of a lot more assumptions, which we'll deal with next week. So what we're going to do is this week we're going to do logistic regression, and we're going to do an introduction to path analysis, or what I'm calling path analysis, which we're really dealing with mediation and moderation. So how one independent variable can affect a dependent variable through something else, or how one independent variable can change how another operates. So maybe work stress works differently on men and women, right? So, but you'll see that in a second. But it's about the pathways, so we can talk about multiple different variables. And next week, what we're going to do is we're going to do two things. One is look at checking our assumptions of linear regressions, which will scare a lot of you and will be, and it's not very pleasant. I just tend to find it something that people find intellectually stimulating, but it's actually really important for you at least to have been introduced to, because if you do use linear regressions and publish with them or use them at work or see any debates, you've got to go through these tests and checks just to make sure you haven't completely screwed up, right, and are running the wrong sort of model. And then the last thing we'll do next week is just to go through a few different types. So I think, Jarvis, you've got a audit, is it ordinal? Audit logistic regression or audit regression in yours? Ordinal? Maybe, you didn't notice. I was looking at it at the library going, actually, so, and other people, you'll hear about, when you start having all these different dependent variables, some people will have a count, right, of the number of X events that happen in a place, or someone will have a dependent variable which is a strongly agree to strongly disagree, which is kind of an ordinal variable. That's, I think you've got some of that. There's all these different types of more complex models, and I'm just going to introduce them to you. But hopefully what I want you to learn next week when we do that is actually how similar they are. Right? There's someone who's done some complicated maths behind it all, and there is some new stuff to understand, but actually the real fundamentals we've done over the last week and this week, will really set you in good stead for moving on to the more complex models. Okay, what questions do you have at this stage? Okay, so this week what we're going to do is learn about path analysis. I've already said what we're going to do. So let me just introduce you to today's data set. So we've got a different data set that I've put together. It's actually from one of my own papers. I felt quite guilty about giving you my own papers, but then one of my really senior advisors told me about a month ago that when he has graduate students, he actually takes them to see two different lectures by different professors. One week where they're teaching other people's material and one week where they're teaching their own research. And the graduate students, apparently, he says, now what did you notice? And apparently people are just much better at talking about their own research. They know it, they're interested in it, they've really got in depth with it, and so they can tell it. So I feel less guilty about it, because apparently, according to him, this will be a better class. But anyway. So this one is one published in 2017, which is on the threat of deportation. It's basically about migrant workers, and it's about how migrant workers who are threatened with being sent home, it's in Singapore, end up showing much higher levels of emotional and mental distress. And then it goes into more detail. It actually is a mixed methods. So it has the first part is regression models and path analysis. The second half is based on qualitative interviews we're not going to go into the qualitative, but I think if anyone's interested in it, it's something that's pretty readable and pretty interesting, and it's a pretty simple execution of a thematic analysis in qualitative. But anyway, so the data set is nearly 600 migrant workers in Singapore collected in 2013. It was actually collected over 2 weeks by about 50 university students. And what we did, and these workers in Singapore, almost all of them that we've got here are from the construction and marine industry. So, in Australia, construction work can actually be quite a well-paid job, and middle-class job and stuff like that. Maybe lower middle class, but even this can be really well-paid.
Over 100K easily.
Yeah, over 100K, right? Well, in Singapore, everyone who does those jobs is from Bangladesh on about $500 to $1,000 a month, living in army barracks, basically, right? Temporary army barracks. So these workers, they face a lot of issues. There's no minimum wage in Singapore. They can join a union, but the unions can't be run by them. They can't hold independent protests. A whole lot of stuff. And what happened for me as a researcher, and this is interesting about how issues emerge, I just happened to be invited by a student to help with the non-government organisation called Transient Workers Camp 2, like with the research group, and that night one of the leading people there said, hey, I need some help with a survey, would you like to help tomorrow night? I'm like, okay, sure. So they made a survey, and it was actually a quantitative survey. It was that big. And it was the best survey I've ever done. I've got a paper on this actually, but it just made it big. It was this big, and it simply said, and what it was that this NGO, right in the centre of Singapore, in a place called Little India, would feed every single night between 300 and 500 homeless migrant workers, most of whom had workplace injuries, and the others had salary claims. And so we did a survey of them where we just sort of asked them about the conditions of their injuries and what happened, whether they got doctor's treatment when they got it, and did they get medical leave or not. Because it turns out that, almost all, like many of the migrant workers, and this is now being proven in the High Court in a couple of cases, that many migrant workers, when they got workplace injuries, the doctors colluded with the employer to make sure they didn't get medical leave. The reason was, if you get more than 3 days medical leave, you have to report a workplace accident. That ruins the company's reputation with the Ministry of Manpower, may lead to loss of contracts, ruins the safety record. Also, they don't want evidence to exist and blah, blah, blah. So, and also it costs them money often as well, so they get quite cheap doctor services. So I went there basically. I'm sorry to do such a detailed background on it, but I think it provides a bit of detail. I went there and we just sat and we surveyed about 150 of these workers with this tiny survey that just asked about medical leave. And I think we asked them, when you went to a private hospital, on average, how many days leave did you get? And then when you went to a public hospital, how many days leave did you get? I think the average when they first went to a private hospital was 4 days. And when they subsequently went to a public hospital, it was about 8 weeks. I mean, it's actually got printed, and actually we did it on the Friday. By the Sunday, it got in the front page of the paper, and it was it made me realize how much very simple quantitative research could make some impact, even in a quite an authoritarian place like Singapore, it inspired me to then start getting involved and do more. And basically what happened for me was actually I had a contract for 4 years. I got it renewed, and I had another 5-year contract. At the end of that, I could have got tenure and sort of had permanent employment, but what I basically decided to do was get involved in this, which I think did lead to the consequences I thought, which was I lost my job in the long term. But it also, I think I was right in the sense that actually everyone else lost their job as well, but not for doing political activism. It turns out in my department there was such a neoliberal kind of like ruthless environment. Only 15% of people actually got tenure. They just turned academics over like that. So that's a very personal background story, but the the way to say that is that when within about a month of me getting my second contract, I had a student come to me and say, "I'll work for you for free for over Christmas. I got nothing to do, and I figure you'll work me hard." And it was over the summer break. And I said, "Okay, sure." I gave her like 4 different options of helping her, and she said, "Let's do this one." And so we designed this study, showed it to Chewy and Co. And we did it. It was a 4-page survey. I can't actually give you the original data. The reason I can't give you the original data is it's confidential. So what I did when I taught this class last time is I spent a week or 2 working out how to simulate data. And you can simulate a data set from like the correlation matrix and a few other things like that. And so this is a fake data set, but you'll be surprised it's pretty good as a model of what was really going on. So the code book can be seen here. It's a very crude and simple code book that I made last year. I would make a better one this time, but if you just click on it, click on that, you will see it. Oh, just want to go back. So these are 6 different measures of depression and anxiety: nervousness, hopelessness, restlessness, effort, worthlessness, age, gender, whether they're industry, number of working hours, whether they cleared their agent fee, rent to their employer, whether they were threatened with deportation, etc. And then it's got a bit of details about what each of them are, further information. You can load it. I'll show you how to load it in a second. One thing to say is that if you go to this link, Sci-Hub, let's just, I'll go to this version of it. So this is the paper, and I'm trying to remember what I was going to show you in it. Yeah, I mean, just so you understand what the theoretical model of the paper was, and this is a sort of an example of a theoretical model of a path diagram. What's wrong?
No, it's all right.
Are we good? So this here is the theoretical model that we were using. So over here, serious mental illness, so which is like a measure of depression, but a measure of clinical depression that is like 30 days or more of basically not able to do your job, and in a year. And these are socioeconomic and demographic characteristics, workplace conflict, which is like whether you had a workplace injury or you had a salary claim, you said your employer didn't pay you. And then this is the threat of deportation, which I can show you what it took the form of, but it took out the form of everything from maybe you should go home to, actually using there's actually these things called repatriation agencies, which are literally security agencies that have little small prisons in private buildings that safekeep you and then take you to the airport. Yes?
Is this based on some article of R or?
This here? No, I just made this in like Word or something. Right, so because this is the theoretical model. Yeah? This is the theoretical model. Are you following it? Yeah? And the idea was that, and just to tell you, the overall argument is that the threat of deportation is used as a way to exercise power in workplace conflicts. And not only does the workplace conflict make you, unhappy and meet the criteria for mental illness, but this makes it a hell of a lot worse. Yeah. I think it's like 8 to 12 times or something. So just to give a sense of it, where does this all go? we surveyed about half of the survey we did of just regular migrant workers on the streets of Little India who were working. And I think about 12% of them met the criteria for serious mental illness. Of the workers who were going to this food centre, this soup kitchen, that about 65% of them met the criteria. And then when we broke it down, if you hadn't been threatened, even if you had an injury, it was quite a lot lower. But once you were threatened, it went up like by very, very large amounts. Sorry to delay. And if you go through this I'm going to just show you why we include descriptive statistics tables. This is a really good example of it, right? Because you're all thinking, oh, this guy is telling me about this data set, but who is it? I don't really understand what it's like. Well, you can look at this and you can actually really tell who they are, right? So this is 240 ordinary workers. This is 340 claimant workers. What is the Kessler 6? Do you know what the Kessler 6 is? No, sorry, I should explain that to you. This is the dependent variable. So the dependent variable in this model,
It's like a depression test.
it's a depression test. But it's useful actually to illustrate some of the other points we've done with indices and so forth. So what it says is, and you can all do this for yourselves right now, it says in the last 30 days, how often have you felt?
I did a K-12.
Yeah, that's right. There's a big one. This is the shorter, quicker version, right? But I think we saw them before. They were like worthless, so depressed you couldn't get out. You couldn't, do something or other. Anxious and fidgety, etc., right? And you could answer none of the time, a little of the time, some, most, and all, right? And this was 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And there were 6 of these. So it can go from 0, if you answered that all, to 4 by 6, which is 24. Yeah? And then the other thing was that we actually it turns out, this was invented at Harvard, and I emailed, this is the thing, if you've got an academic, just email the person who wrote the article. No one will have ever talked to them or even read their article. They'll feel so appreciated. In this case, I emailed the guy Kessler who invented this and said, how do I report this in a public way? He said, well, most people convert it to serious mental illness because then you can just report the changes in the odds ratio. I'm like, oh, okay. So the way you convert K6 to, I'll just put it here, K6 to SMI, or serious mental illness, is that if K6, I think, is less than 12, then SMI equals 0. And if the K6 is equal to or greater than 12, then SMI equals 1. Yep. And so that gave us our binary dependent variable, which is really important in this case for doing a logistic regression, which is what we're learning about today. It turns out that in this, what was I saying? Oh yeah, just to say, yes.
You report the maximum value of K6 is 24. Does that mean there is actually
a person yes.
scored 24?
Yeah, that's right, exactly. So, and you can tell that with age. They could have given me any age, but the oldest ordinary work was 49, oldest claimant work was 52.
But what is the full mark of K6?
24. So there were some people who said all the time in both categories.
So whatever the case, in this table we just report the maximum in the data set,
No, in this in the data set, yeah, not theoretically, but in the data set. And this is why this is just generated like you generated yours. Yeah.
Okay.
But this means it just happens to go on the full range. So if we go through here, we can see a lot of things that immediately are interesting. So the average score in the K6 is about 7, so they said a little on most answers for ordinary people. Like, surely should have all of us, you know? And over here, it's what is the some of the time? So it's more like some of the time, and they're starting to really hit on average, they've actually gone over their SMI. How many of those that translate to in terms of SMI? 13% of ordinary workers, about 61% of the claimant workers. We can see their age, they're about 30, both groups are about 30. This I just think, are they married? About half of them are married, about half of them have children. Funniest question. When we were doing the survey, we said, we had to go, are you married? Yes or no? And do you have children? Yes or no? But for them, who were this ultra-religious people, they were like, if they said they weren't married, you said, do you have children? Their response was not, no. Their response was, how can? It was just like, not possible. The Filipinos were very religious, but they understood that. But anyway, so do you have dependents? I think it was at some of those. So again, both children and married. Salary. So
why is 2 dependent?
we just made a variable. What we wanted to do here was we wanted to reduce the number of variables in our data set. So we said that really these two come down to the fact that you've got people at home who need you, right? And that can cause a stress on you.
Yeah.
But maybe it's protective as well, but you've got people who need your income.
So is it boundary variable?
Yeah.
Dependence.
This is an independent variable. So this is dependent variable.
No, is it
If it's 0 to 2, it can't be dummy.
So what
It's the sum of 2 dummies.
Okay, so it's a summation of married and
Yes.
true. Okay.
In fact, that means they should have that up. Yeah, they do. Salary in US dollars, US hundreds of dollars. So, this one. Yeah, so the lowest someone was paid in this group was $320 a month, and the highest was $202,400. Average about 1,000, and average about 750 hours a week. These people worked about 61, and the claimant worker said they worked about 70. About 50% of them worked over, blah, blah, blah. You can see, you can go through it. We had also these other ones around workplace conflict. I won't go into them too much. But, I mean, amongst other things, almost all of them had run away from their employer, of the claimant workers. Okay, so I don't want to say, you see how when we do this, I really think this is very important and illustrative, because I think that what I want you to take away from this bit is that you're like, why do I have to do the summary, these variables? It's like, this is like 90% of the story, This is all of the color and detail, and also proves there's real human beings that sort of make sense and situate you somewhere. Yeah? So it's really important you do this, do it well, so that, because the people who read, if they're practitioners or they're experts in the area, they're going to look at it and go, what's really going on? Okay, yeah, this all makes sense, yeah? Are you following? And I'll show you one last one. So if we look at threatened with deportation, 11% of the ordinary workers have been threatened with deportation, and 64% of the claimant workers said they've been threatened with deportation. We also, I won't go into it. This is the model, which I'll show you in a second, and this is a path analysis of it, which I'll show you later. And this is an example of using a nice graph to illustrate the findings, which you'll sort of deal with in a couple of weeks. But I wanted to show you, where is it? Oh yeah, I mean I want to, because I like research methods and I'm not particularly qualified This is a really good example of how you, like, as practitioners, you combine qual and quant research. So you're probably all thinking, well, what is this threat of deportation that's your big dependent variable? So we went through and interviewed 150 workers and then pulled out all of them that mentioned being threatened with deportation and then classified them. And really we found four main things. They were indirect threats, direct threats, dismissal with attempt to deport, and violence or threat of violence and coercion. And so indirect threats, the way I always like to explain indirect threats is, you know, when the mafia guy says to you, you know, your daughter should really look after her health. He's not saying anything about, he's not expressing care for your daughter's health, right? And that's what an indirect threat is. It can be read many ways, but often it's read correctly. The supervisor raised his voice and said, this is not in a hotel, and if you're not happy, you're more than welcome to leave. Direct threats, where they were literally the real meaning of threat. So they said, if you don't do this, then I will do this. Instead, after 3 months, he was threatened to go back to work, and if he didn't, he was going to be sent back. He would be sent back if he ever raised the fact that he'd been underpaid. And then dismissal with attempt to deport, you're basically brought into the office. They say, hey, sign this contract, it's got nothing to do with anything, you can't read English, just sign it. They sign it and say, oh, okay, you just signed that, you've cancelled and we're deporting you, get in the car, you're off the airport now. And that's that, and then the threat of violence is where this returned to the dormitory, his boss called him into the head office, produced a return ticket and asked him to go home and rest well. Rest well. He refused. He was surrounded by 5 burly men that got them gangsters, who kicked and slapped him when he refused to sign papers or cancel his work. So I think it's useful again. This is a way, I just want to say, as researchers noticed, it is really important that your key variables are centered, like are really solidly nailed down. So you can answer. Is this making sense? And by doing that, then the rest of it comes alive when you start doing the maths. Yeah? Okay, so, long story short, I'm just going to jump out of that. So we'll come back to that. I'll just show you the last bit, I'll just show you. So these are the models, which again are going to not mean much to you. But what it turns out is the model we ran, I'll show you what it looks like. I'm not going to do that again. It's a bit, I'm just going to draw it here. The model we ran if you remember, it goes like this. There are all these demographic variables. We could call them that. There is the chance of having an injury. There's a chance of having a salary claim. Yep, so all of these could affect these. Then there is being threatened with deportation, and then there is serious mental illness down here. Yeah, and so our model is that these could increase the chances of these, and this could have an impact on that. Are you following this? Yes? No?
Unless it's factor analysis.
No, it's not like, it's not. It's much more causal. So factor analysis says these things go together, right? So in this case, the factor analysis sort of stuff would be whether you're depressed, anxious, worthless, all those things, they factor analytically form one factor called the Kessler 6, right? Or which we can convert into SMI. So factor analysis is here, yeah? And yeah, that's an example of it. That's a clear example of where you would use factor analysis. This is actually saying this causes this, causes this, causes this. Now, It's more than correlate. Correlation, causation, yeah. It's an attempt at it anyway, yes.
So how do you decide the direction of the arrow?
Yeah, so we're going to do that towards the end of the class, but I'll give you the simple hint. It is, the short answer is, you've got to use logic and theory and assumptions, right? So the logic here is that if someone is in a construction industry, what's a good one? If you have an injury, it doesn't make you Bangladeshi, right? So it must be the Bangladeshi that comes before injury, right? And you can think about that with gender as well. Gender's good like that. You go, depression does not make you male or female. It must be in the other direction, right? Now maybe there's some third variable, but at least you know which one's not moving, right? And that gives you a direction to put the arrow in. And then sometimes you can say, and what we had to say was, well, when we did all the interviews, it didn't seem that people were threatened with deportation and then got also stressed and then got injured and then got depressed. You know, they got depressed, and then because they were depressed, they weren't doing their job, they got threatened with deportation, and then because they weren't doing their they got injured. You know, it didn't look like, none of the stories at least came out that way, right? So but again, it's an argument and it's an assumption because this is what we call cross-sectional data. Are we following? Is this good? Is the pace okay, or do you want to get on with the R? Good so far?
So basically, this is just, you can transform the matrix into
parts, yeah.
Like this, yeah.
Which is, I think it's just bloody cool, really, when you think about it. Now, it requires you to make assumptions and justify those assumptions, and just like imaginations can produce false memories, we can produce complete bullshit here, right? But that's what we have peer review for, that's why we have debates, that's why you can argue with me even now, etc., right? Because, you know, I may think that assumption is fair enough, but you may not, or the reviewer may not, and stuff like that. Yeah. So the thing to note here, and this is going to be covered later, but may we'll get into it now, wherever arrows go in, that is a dependent variable. They go into a dependent variable, and these are the ones that send are independent variables, and this altogether is one model. So how many models can you see here on this page? This ugly thing here. 5? 5? Everyone agree? 5? What are they? You're right, actually. You're right, given that there's 5 up there as well. What are the 5 models? Anyone want to say?
Demography and...
Pardon?
Like only demography and...
No, that's not a model.
That's not?
They're variables.
No,
This is variables, this is a variable, this is a variable.
I mean, only demography and...
These are variables, right? Oh, this is actually a series of variables. There's a whole lot of different variables. And actually this is going on as well.
So
what are the models? What's the dependent variables in the models?
Regression.
Threats. So one in different is the likelihood of reaching the serious mental illness. Yeah, very good. What's the other models?
Injury.
The likelihood of injury, exactly. Of being an injured worker versus not an injured worker. Yep. Having a salary dispute. What's your likelihood of having a salary dispute? Threat of deportation. Oh, very good. And is that it? Maybe there's only 4. Oh yeah, there are only 4 actually. I lied. There are only 4. There are not 5. So sorry. There are 5 models for a different reason actually, which is really important. Which is that what we have here, and this is an important thing you'll see in research. This is your reduced model. Your kind of like idiot's model, where we have, let's presume, only demographic characteristics affect serious mental illness, right? So let's assume it's just, model 1 is simply just that affecting this. Yeah? Good? And then these 4 are actually the complete models. Yep? Good. Happy so far?
Yeah.
Happy so far? What questions do you have? Yeah?
So far, what's the difference? No, what's the difference between logic and
Linear. So yeah, we haven't really got to that. We are going to spend a lot of time on it, and this is a lot of setup. What I want you to notice, however, because I want you can think about these things easier if you think in the concrete, right? And notice, binary, injury or not, salary claim or not, threatened with deportation or not, serious mental illness or not, all binary. Yep. And you can actually tell here, these look very similar to a normal logistic regression model, right? The confidence interval is just a different way of saying, we know that it's just a different way of expressing the significance or not. And so we just get a series of numbers here with asterisks, which mean the p-values, and they've got a star, it's p is less than 0.05, 2 is 0.01, 3 is 0.001, and the only different, the major one, probably the biggest difference of all of this is simply this, that how you interpret these numbers, right? And we have to interpret them as what's called odds ratios, and we're going to spend quite a lot of time talking about that today just to get that into your head. But the way to think about them in simple terms is they're a bit like horse racing odds, where what's the chance that what's the chance that something will happen divided by what's the chance it won't happen, basically. So comparing two groups, let me pick one for you, which is quite illustrative. Yeah, so if you're those who are threatened with deportation had a 7.5 times higher, I mean express this wrongly, but close enough, a greater odds of getting serious mental illness as compared to those who were not threatened with deportation. Yes?
Just a question. So we don't combine different
Models.
like different groups of variables. Let's say
We are combining some of them. So threatened with deportation is dependent variable here, and it is an independent variable here. So, but it's true, we are keeping the models separate. So there are much more complex and advanced ways to do this, like structural equation modeling and mediation analysis. But this is what 95% of the time is what you will do. And they're based on the same principles anyway. Yeah, so no, we're not, in a sense they have been running independent of each other. Yeah? Sorry.
So in order to decide how do we combine them, we just have to use theories.
Yeah, in your case you're lucky because in your case, for your papers you just copied other papers, yeah. But otherwise, in general, yes, you use theory. I mean, you use theory, you use logic. Yeah, you have assumptions and also you try and test those assumptions. So often what you will do in terms of testing those assumptions is go and look at other academic research that says it does happen in this direction, not in that direction, or such. Yeah, there may be experimental research that looks at the fact that the longer you work, the more depressed you get, or something like that. It's not the reverse. I mean, I'm making it up, but whatever it is. Yeah? We're making sense? Okay, so that's all illustration and background. I'll just show you a couple of quick things. So one other thing is that these have an R-squared. There are lots of different R-squareds you can use. I've used Nagelkirk R-squared in this paper. I think there's a better one to use now for logistic regressions, and that's actually picked by one of the programs we're going to use, so it just automatically generates it for you. But you can sort of see along here that our demographic model explains about 22% of variance. Our full model explains about 40% of variance in serious mental illness. Our model of threat of deportation explains about 42% of variation within the data set of the dependent variable. Good?
Sorry, is that between the two groups or is that a 40?
What it means is that,
So there's variance of 42%.
no, it's not variance, it's the R squared.
The R squared. Oh,
So the R squared, you know,
yep.
yeah. So it's sort of like how much of the dependent variable can be explained, or how much, it's actually how much of a kind of a null model.
Yep.
So how much error in a null model. So if we just took a constant, like just, you know, y-intercept and a straight line,
Yep.
and we use that to estimate threat of deportation, and we had a huge amount of error, like how much variation is there of each point from the line, and then we actually fit this entire model, and we get a much better, you know, prediction of each of the points. Well, it reduces the amount of error by about 42%. Yeah, it's not perfect, but it's pretty huge actually. Yes.
Is it necessary to put independent variable into binary variable?
No. So in this case, the independent variable can be binary or ordinal or continuous. It just can't be categorical. If it's categorical, you need to dummy it out, of course, right? Because so you can see here, age is continuous, dependence was 1, 0, 1, and 2, salary is in dollars, hours, construction is binary, Bangladeshi is binary, cleared agent fee is binary, etc. Yeah, so it varies. You can have all different types of independent
So you
variables.
do have to jump.
Huh?
He's talking about the dependent variable.
The dependent?
Yes.
Oh, the dependent, yes, of course you do. You must. If you want to use a linear logistic regression,
Must be.
it must be binary.
Must be binary.
Must be. I mean, otherwise there's other models to use, right? Like you, but a logistic regression has a binary outcome. That is what it is for. That is a reason for existence.
So in my paper, what they've done, so there was,
Yes, sorry.
there was a Likert scale,
Yes.
which they basically, you know, satisfactory, unsatisfactory. They've just gone, no, I'm going to place those in 2. It's just going to be satisfied and unsatisfied.
Yeah.
And that's
1 and 0.
1 and 0, and that's.
And it's a binary. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you properly, but I think I was very interested in what you were asking for.
Yeah, say, remember me repeat what he said?
Yes, please.
Claude, you want to say it?
Well, I think it is the same. You've got a Euro.
Yeah, have a lot of
Yeah.
alternate ones.
So my data set,
Yes.
they, it's basically the independent variable is satisfaction, and it goes from very satisfied to unsatisfied.
Yeah.
So they've done a logistic regression, and they've split it. They've done 1, 0 to satisfied and unsatisfied, 1 and 0, and then they've basically done this with that, which now, I now understand what they've done.
Why it's
Yeah.
Good. So, yeah. We'll leave it at that. That's a, so, yes.
Should we check the assumptions before doing observation, like autocorrelation, multipolarity, normality?
Yeah, I mean, you'll have to check that before or after you've done it, but before you publish it. We're going to do a lot of that stuff next week. We're going to do some basic introduction to regression diagnostics. But yes, you still have to do all of that. The short answer is, the thing is, it just tends to pass. The logistic regression it makes less assumptions, so it passes much better. Yep. Sorry, just to explain to everyone who didn't understand what that was. One of the things that by necessity we have to learn is how we can tell whether the assumptions we're making are violated. So for example, if 2 of these variables were highly correlated with each other, like there was something like depression and anxiety, or maybe 2 different measures of depression, and we put them in there, that would, chances are, start to screw up the model. So it might say they're not significant when they are significant, or that they are significant when they're not. I think in this case it inflates the standard error, so it says they're not significant. That's an example. So you've got all these things you need to test, right? Whether the variables in the model start to inflate what's called inflating standard errors, and whether there's a whole lot of other things. Are there ordering effects? You know, so the order which people did the study in, does it actually change the results and things like this? So we have to test for those sorts of assumptions, or do the dependent variables predict the errors in terms the independent variables predict the error terms in the model. So we have to check all that. We're going to do it next week. I'm saving the best for last. But more, I think, no, that's a joke. I'm saving that for next week because hopefully you will have got the fundamentals and it will not just confuse you. That's why I'm moving in this order. Yep. Good? Okay, so logistic regression. What I've got here is the first thing we're just going to do is learn how to actually run the logistic regression. Where is it? Oh, damn. We've sort of done this already, this exercise. So the first exercise I was going to do for you is to ask you to look at those models and say, what's the dependent variable in each model? These are supposed to be separate lines. What values do they take? What are the independent variables? What values do they take? Why are there multiple models? Why do we not include all independent variables in the model? And how good are each model, the R squared? We've answered all of that. So we've done the provocation. What I'm going to show you is how you can now actually run in R a reproduction of those models yourself, yeah, with the sample data set. So you run the classic code here, the standard setup code, yeah, and then you can start running these models. Shall I do it with you? Shall we do it together? I know we still haven't got up to interpreting what they mean, but I just want you to really get a solid feel in how to run them, and then you'll get that. Then we'll go through what it really means.
So is that the command for the logistic model, that GLM?
Yeah, that's the name. That's the one we're using. There are different ones you can use, but GLM is what we're using. Yep. So. So this is the code. It works very similar to a linear regression, which is to run the model, store it somewhere, and then use summary to look at the model.
So the only difference is this function is GLM, but linear is...
Yeah, so this one, the key things to note here are GLM is the name of it rather than LM. And we put family binomial in there, which specifies that it's a logistic regression. It turns out that there are lots of different families of generalized linear models you can use, and this is one of them. So I'm just going to run the first bit, and what's happened, it's created a variable up here, model 1, which I can double click on, and it's got all of this data stored inside of it. This is what model 1. Oh, sorry. I'll make it bigger. Please tell me when I do that. Better? Is that too big? All right. So I have run that, and model 1, if you double click on it, it's a big list that has got a whole lot of information in there about it. Some of which you'll use, most of which you won't. Yep. Then we can run the classic way that used to be to look at these things was to run summary model 1. So if you just click that, you'll get a huge amount of R output down here.
Quick question.
Yes.
How do you output that summary table instead of model 1?
Which summary table?
Yeah, so when you go, summary model 1, and you get all that data.
Yeah.
It's nicely formatted. How do you output
How do you get
that?
That's the next line in the code. I'm glad you asked. So if you scroll down, there's the output we just created, but if you use tab model, which is part of the SJ label, it makes sexy tables. Beautiful, huh? And this is quite remarkable. This is made by Germans, and it's like a Mercedes-Benz, the SJ label thing. It really is. Like, I love Germany after this. Like, that literally goes through and uses, like, last time I used to use Stargazer, which is, like, for last year, but SJ has incorporated Stargazer. SJ has also incorporated a whole lot of other things, like it actually goes and picks exactly the right R squared according to the current academic literature that you should use, which is the R squared Toujours, which is from Toujours 2009, which is pretty bloody recent, right? And it makes my R squareds worse, so I don't like it, or her. But, yeah, so it makes these beautiful things. So just tab model 1.
So which package does this tab model?
Ah, yes, good point. So tab model 1 comes from one of the SJ ones. I think I should have put it in, I didn't, but yeah, we can just find out. So you ask, I will tell you. It's tab model, I always do vignette, but here we go. So it's in SJ plot, I think, yeah.
Because one of the things that I struggle with is that there are so many different ways to do this, and I appreciate that's flexible, but
no, it's terrible.
I
No.
don't know which is the best, right?
Yeah.
Instead, it's like, okay, there's one command, you use it, there's nothing that can go wrong. Whereas this is like, well, you can do this.
Yeah, I mean, I think I showed some of you that. So it is a real problem. It's first of all, it is a genuine problem. This is the reason I think Young deserves real credit for this. He went and did a huge amount of research and came down to the SJ models. The big ones that you should, in terms of just general tips for using R, and when you do this, is there are 2 systems to look out for. One is the tidyverse, T-I-D-Y. That is generally really good, and stuff that is made compatible with the tidyverse. And the SJ is even better. It makes almost all the functions like Stata. Yes.
That's why, like, when I was doing some R stuff, and then I look on like Stack Overflow or something, and it would just be like 50 different things to like.
Which one to use?
Yeah, and then it's just overwhelming. Like,
You get overwhelmed. I agree with you.
the SJ one seemed like the most simple from what I've ones I looked at.
It totally is.
Well, maybe because it's explained here. But
No, it is. It literally is. It's a lot more. One of the problems with R is that the people who I should pull up that R status thing. I think sent a couple of you this. I think. I mean, should. This is way too accurate. Oh, come on.
I'd rather stay in a car.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, it's the same.
And this is pretty much accurate, unfortunately, right? I mean, I've got to say, but well, you were there, actually. Did you hear Federico? So, Not Federico. Francesco. Did you Francesco? Francesco's like, I use data, but everyone else uses R now. And my friend is in, my colleague, my cousin works like in the national office of the NHS, and he says, he's with economists, he says there's a small group of us who are using Stata, but the entire rest of the building is using R. And it's sort of, that's the way it's gone. Like I do social networks, which never used any of this at all. And if I showed you the panels of workshops at the academic conference, I would say 80 or 90% of it is now just in R. So I know that it seems frustrating and annoying, but it is really where the academic stuff has gone. And if you can do R, Stata will look easy as well, right? And so that's Excel, SBS. That's a bit rude, actually. SAS is the one that is used with. So SPSS is what the psychologists tend to use with all point and click. I'm teaching SPSS actually to undergrads. It's never as simple as it seems because there is so many options and menus and confusions. Like they're struggling immensely. SAS is what is used by the big corporations. But it has to be used in big corporations where you can't put like 50 billion Coca-Cola sales into memory, right? Or, just gigantic records and so forth. And instead, it actually is able to work with keeping most of the data set on a hard drive, right? And then it can do regression models or whatever on gigantic data sets. Stata, you've heard about, but it is very much, I think, you could think of it as like R, but it is really well organized and controlled so that it has a very standardized syntax and a very standard way of doing things, I think. It also has a really amazing set of books, and I would recommend the Stata books just if you want to learn about any particular package. I often use it. And then this is R. Which is all a bit Mad Max, but I mean, and just to say, this is actually put up for someone who is about to do an art course, teach an art course. And I think the point here is it is not as flashy, it's not as safe, but there is some.
It won't kill you.
It'll probably kill you. It'll probably kill you. Yeah, but no, I don't. Yeah, I'm not. Look, Young and I had to really debate about what to do with these two. And 10 years ago, I was always Stata, but just basically every conference I would go to, like if you go over to biology or astrophysics or any of the sciences here, like. The economists are still using Stata, the psychologists are still using SPSS, but and some big businesses need to use this, but it's becoming overwhelming. And I know it's frustrating, but yeah. Okay, so anyway, let's keep going. Where were we?
The table.
Oh yeah, so you can make a pretty table. So the command for that is just tab model 1. Simple. And just to say, I've been saying this in the so it's SJ plot, I think. All right. Yes, it is. So the way to work out, to keep a track of what packages you're using, and what I've been trying to do, and I forgot to do with this, is to put it in front of it, yeah? So I think this is base. Yeah. And GLM is either going to be stats.
How about the piping? Is it piping to...
Yeah, the piping, it requires you to have, you can't run this unless you've loaded deployer. You can't use this unless you've loaded.
Piping's in deployer.
Deployer, that's right. Piping is in deployer, yes. It's actually in a subset of deployer, or like one that deployer loads, but we don't load that, so. Okay, so you can see we've generated that. we can then go on, and we'll do it kind of quickly, but you can now go on and run model 2. I think I'm just going to, model 2.
But why can such models have stars?
Why don't these have stars? Oh, it's a very good question. So let's take a look at this. Shall we all try and interpret? We're going to learn a little bit more about odds ratios at the moment. The null hypothesis is 1, right? Because above 1 there's a positive correlation, below 1, between 0 and 1 it's a negative correlation. So age is a slight positive but not significant. Dependence, slight positive but not significant. Salary, negative. Yeah, so the higher your salary, the lower your mental illness. We didn't need a regression model to tell us that, right? Or at least less depression, right? The more your working hours, the higher your chances of meeting the criteria of serious mental illness. If you're in construction, it's protective. You're Bangladeshi, it's worse in comparison to Indian. And if you have debt, uncleared agent fee, so if you've got debt, like they pay up to $16,000 to get a job in Singapore. These jobs, like they're $1,000 a month. Most of them would pay between 4 and 12. Yeah, these are odds. This is approximately how much it increases. You could think of it as increases your chance of being in the 1 category rather than the 0 category. So Bangladesh is about 3 times more likely, 3 times higher chance of being in the mental ill category, right? Control it for all these other factors. This is the effect of 1 hour of work. Yes, so notice it's small, but that doesn't really mean anything because it's only 1 hour of work. You getting what I mean? What I want to point out here is that this CI, what does CI stand for? Confidence interval. Confidence interval, yes? Do you remember confidence interval? And confidence interval is a way of expressing your statistic or parameter, the statistic, but in a way that expresses the significance, right? And gives you a sense of uncertainty and whether you can assess it, what the value of the null hypothesis is. Now, whether the null hypothesis is true and whether you can reject it. Now, let me just stop before looking at this. The confidence interval in most of the stuff we've done up until now, how do we know whether something is significant just from the confidence interval?
Not including 0.
Not including 0. That is because 0 is the null hypothesis, right? So basically the rule was up until now. The rule was up until now that if the confidence interval has a minus and a plus, it's not significant, right? It's got 2 pluses or 2 minuses, it is significant. Yep, the 2 numbers. However, notice here the null hypothesis now becomes 1 because it is kind of like the odds of the 2 categories are the same. 1 means, think of horse racing odds of 1 to 1, right? That means if they win or lose, you get the same payout, right? And so 1 is actually now a null hypothesis. So when we look at the confidence intervals, we say, does the confidence interval include 1 or not? Right? So here, does the confidence interval include 1? No. Oh, and the p-value. Notice they're just different ways of saying exactly the same bloody thing, almost. Yeah? So it does not include 1. Does this include 1?
Yes.
It does, and it's not significant. Does this include 1?
Yes.
Not significant, and none of these include 1. Cool, huh?
So, can it be interpreted as percentages, like 0.999?
No. So I'll tell you what, the way you do this, I think, this is how I do it, right? Because I think, I've been reading a book. I've been reading all these books on memory and brain and so forth. And apparently, our brains are just terrible at maths for really simple reasons that we can think of about. You know, our ability to do maths is basically like the ability to count to about 10. And we've got to do everything with that. I'm being crude about it, but it's not very good, right? So we have to think in analogies, yeah. And then we also need to be analytically precise when we write things down or express things. Yeah, but when we're trying to understand these things, so I would understand these things as chances, right? So if you're in construction industry, you have almost half the chance of being seriously mentally ill as against someone who is not in the construction industry, who's in a shipyard. So it turns out the shipyards are shit. These people like build the shipyards. These people refit ships and build oil rigs and yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
I was just going to ask you answered my question just then. I was going to ask what the alternative to construction was.
Yeah. So when it's below 1, think of it as 0.621 ... 1.
No, I meant
what's the other thing? Yeah, marine.
Yeah.
Marine, and there's a few people who do landscape gardening and stuff in this data set. So that's the intuitive way to think about it, right? And in Bangladeshi, it's basically a Bangladeshi is about 3 times the greater chance than an Indian, right? But it's not quite right. It's not the correct way to express it, but it is one that you can roughly understand and get, right? To do it precisely when you write up your work and when you express it in front of a professional audience is I always go and actually look at the text of another academic paper in a good journal and see how they have expressed the same thing. Because it is not easy. These are not even actually odds, which is kind of what we're thinking of. They're odds ratio. They're a ratio of 2 different odds. Yeah, like it's the division of 2 divisions, which are the transformations of probabilities. We'll see it in a second, but it's not easy. You need to try to express it. You need to express it correctly.
So does that mean you can't combine the digits the way you can with other models?
No, you can combine them. What do you mean? Well, you can't combine them by just adding them together. Yeah, that's right.
No, so what I mean is you can't say, the odds of having serious mental illness in Bangladesh is, say, 4 times the odds of construction or something like that. It's that you have to compare it to basically the other.
Yeah, so it's like a Bangladeshi is also a construction worker.
The way we
what I mean is like
no. Yeah, you mean
know what I mean? Like
can I explain? Yeah. Oh, sorry, you go. No,
yeah, you go.
So what she's saying is, what Lee is saying is that we could say something. We used to be able to say that, say being a woman reduces your quiz score by 1 in that other thing, right? And having 1 more year of education increases your quiz score by 0.1, right? And so they're sort of measured in the same units and we can compare them. Well, these are broadly the same units because the dependent variable is the same, but they are not as directly comparable, and this leads to the way that you end up doing reporting. So the way you end up doing reporting, if I can just jump ahead and go to paper again, is that what you end up doing is nice little things like this. So you actually make the full model at the mean values, and then this is called, what is it called? Where's the title of the model? Oh, there. So this says the estimated marginal means of serious mental illness or migrant workers experiencing injury, dispute, salary disputes, and threat of deportation. What this BORSS means, you can think of it as this way, is that if there is a worker who's got an injury dispute, they've been threatened with deportation, then the percentage chance that they will, the percentage of them, or the percentage chance of them, or the chance that they will have it is about 66%. But this line represents the confidence interval because there's some variation. Yeah, so it is really annoying, to be honest with you, that to add them together takes more time and takes a slightly more complicated methods. The advantage of it, if I could say, is that people kind of get some intuitive notion of odds ratios. So odds ratios are used to represent, just to say, almost, you know, you hear all the time, red butter will kill you, butter makes you healthy, coconut oil helps you, coconut will kill you, red meat will help you, red meat will kill you, whatever. You know, you hear these health reports all the time over decades and decades. All those are reporting the results of logistic regression results, almost every single one of them, because they are actually at some level intuitively translatable for the general population. Yeah? Does that make sense? But you really need to be careful about a lot of those, because a lot of them would make reports that make things sound bigger than they are. Almost all of the time. Almost all of the time, those medical ones that you hear about, the R squared is like 2%. Right, or the increase in R squared for whatever they're talking about is 2%, and even the effect size is quite small. Yeah. So I don't see your question. Yeah. And the other thing that I want to point out is that it turns out that generally good quality papers, if I can be a bit, will tend to have a pattern which is to have that descriptive statistics table, which really tells about the population, some regression models, and then they will have some sort of graph where they relate their really key independent variables to their key dependent variable, because pictures tell 1,000 words and really solidify it in the mind, and also allow you to evaluate, does it matter? You know, like you look at this and you go, 12% versus 66, yeah, I think it matters. You know what I mean? This is not like a 2% R squared or something like that. Yeah? So, and that's why we're going to do graphs right towards the end, and it's where you should think about it, and also just notice it when you read academic articles or whatever. Are we good?
So,
should we take, yes?
if you're looking at that percentage, what would that look like in terms of that table?
Yeah.
Where would you get that from?
Where would you get that from? No. That is a little bit more complicated. It is actually, you've taken, what that is, we're not doing that today, but broadly speaking, what it is doing is it is taking the model, and then it is, but it's, yeah, basically it actually has to estimate what it does is it goes and estimates the dependent variable based on it estimates the dependent variable while holding these two constant, right? So having an injury and a salary dispute. With
So that's one step further then.
Yeah, it's one step further than we're doing today. I mean, I had to go and research this to know how to do it. No, it's not. But it's not that complicated, but it's sort of like using your model to go and predict something. Yeah. So the way you would do it, you could think of it as yeah, I'll just leave it. Is that okay? I'm going to jump ahead and just show you one last thing, and I think we better take a break in a second, and then we'll get on to the theory. So the last thing is, I just want to say you can keep running those 5 models, and eventually you will get to this, where actually tab model is really amazing. It actually combines everything for you, and it doesn't only combine everything, and it puts the R squareds at the bottom and all this sort of stuff. You could also then cut and paste that. So notice I've left off the confidence intervals to make it a bit more compact.
It doesn't give the standard error though.
You can if you want.
Ah.
It's just settings. There is a million different settings in here. You can make the standard error appear to the side, underneath, in brackets, whatever you want. You can make the p-value appear as stars or as p-values or whatever you want. You can have odds ratios or you can have betas or whatever. It's infinite, almost infinitely manipulable. Okay. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I suggest you to take a 5-minute toilet break, stretch our legs, have a cigarette, whatever else, and then we'll come back and we'll do more of the theory of this all. Yep. How's the pace? Is this all right? Yeah. I feel like my style with these things is that I could get up here and and just give a big maths lecture and get through thousands of things. But what I'm trying to do with this is I'm asking what would I want. What I think getting the fundamentals really, really solid and right in your heads is really, really important. And so that's why we're taking our time with this and really getting on top of it all. Does that make sense? Is that okay with you as a style? Yes? Milena, do you like that?
Yeah.
Good.
When running through code, it still doesn't appear as stars, but yeah.
Oh yeah, I think I accidentally left the old code in there. So if you take the old, where's the code? So what's the code? Go back, scroll down. No, scroll down. Just a little bit down. So it's just scroll up. So show confidence or show standard error.
Should be.
So what does it show you? Okay, yeah, so it is. It's a p-value one. I've got it here. I'll get it. Hang on. It's fine. It's just that So let's go and just find out how would we find out the answer to that? We would go to SJ. Well, here it is, SJ plot, and then we'd search on. We just do a Google search for SJ plot and tab model, tab_model. Here it is. This is.
That's called Strange Jack, and it gives you the whole.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, so if you let me just show you this. So if you go to anytime you use a package, if you just do SJ plot, tab_model R, not 4, but R, but anyway. You will find a few different things, but one of the main ones the main one is if you just go to SJ plot R, this will give you the PDF for the entire package, right? And in here will be absolutely everything, but it's not going to be that nice. So if you go tab_model on page 95 in here, you can see this is the entire and all the options, right? And then it describes every single option. This is actually what appears in the help if you do a help search in R. And so you wanted the p-values. I think it's something to do with. Sorry, did you work this out?
I found that.
You found this?
Show P.
It was really good.
It's not show P. Something else.
Show.P adds asterisks that indicate the significance level of estimates of the value tables.
So where is it? Show.P. Logical p-values are also printed. So show dot, and then you on here, just to say the way it works is on this is what the default values are. So show P is true. So we need to set show P as false. I'm just going to put it in this one.
You just said show me as full. Just cancel the one. Cancel the column.
Okay, so that cancels the column. It doesn't give you the asterisk. So I think then it is about, it's the asterisk. I actually had it in there. Well, clearly because I made the, here it is, P style.
That is.
There you go. I mean, this is just a different one. This is not the full model, but it's now just got asterisks and I've turned off the P's. And you can turn off the confidence intervals.
Can we change it to like, say, if P is smaller, it's less than 0.001, it's 1 star, it's bigger than that, it's no star. Because the original article of mine is using
1 star or no. I would have to go do the research to find that out. I don't know. I'm not sure whether often the way these work is that these are dependent on other packages, so you sort of need to do a bit
in
of.
this case, does it matter?
No,
Okay.
it really doesn't matter at all. Okay, are we good? Did people get that? Yes? Bathroom? 5-minute break? If anyone wants me to give them more feedback on their code or anything like that, one thing you can do is to do the exercise each week. I created for Lee as an external student, but if you've got energy and time and you want to get feedback and share it, and I'll give you written comments on it, post up there. Has it been useful for you, Lee? Yes. you know what I'm talking about? No. So because we were actually going to, it turns out we just had one external student, but there is, if you miss class, one of the things you can do to make up for the attendance is to go here and go to individual blogs. And then here, I think there's instructions down the bottom here. Instructions. This is the place where external students or internal students who miss class can post their answers. It counts to participation. Don't do more than 2 exercises. Don't write more than 600 words. I don't want to read it. No. Write a couple of sentences explaining each table statistic. Separate the blog for each quiz. Please paste the code and outputs that don't attach as files, and please attach the data sets. I mean, that's just instructions, so that it's easy for us. And so Lee posted it. She attached it that week. That's why I wrote the instructions. Instructions, that's right. I did. I created the instructions. And so here we go. So like for week 6 where we did factor analysis, Lee did a factor analysis of the unemployment rates and inflation rates for her data set, did a parallel analysis, and then did a factor analysis with these 2 different figures showing that inflation formed one factor and all the other employment rates formed another factor. And then she also pretended to say, she wanted to make a index out of factor 1 and to see whether it was or both of them, and to see whether they were reliable factors or not, reliable indexes or not. And then included her R code. So you can all steal her R code too. Just joking. No, there's no such thing as theft. In this case anyway. I don't think. Is that okay? Stealing. Pardon?
Not worth stealing.
No, it's pretty good. Okay, and then so this one is, and then so I just show you. But if you want to do that and post some of your stuff up there, I'm really happy to comment on it, and I've written some comments. Yeah. Probably don't have the time, but if you do. Okay, shall we carry on? Okay, now we get into the serious stuff. What questions do you have at this stage?
I've got one that I might talk to you afterwards. This is an article, and it is a logistics regression. So the tables that are made up in regression. So these don't look like odds there.
So one of the ways you can tell whether they're, okay, they don't, but what they are is, we're going to learn about this, but when you report it logistic regression, the conventional and better way to express it is as an odds ratio, but you can always just leave it in the form of the beta coefficient that you get, or the B that you get, and that's what they've left. And that centers on 0 and goes positive and negative. Right? So, one of the things to just say when you look at people, I've looked through people's output for logistic regressions, and if there are negative values there and they tell you it's an odds ratio, it's just not possible. But people screw it up all the time. Yeah, and so it's an interesting side. Okay, so let's go through this. Summary. Logistic regressions, some outcome variables are inherently binary. Death, catching a disease, being cured, pregnancy, passing an exam, being re-elected to government. These are inherently binary outcomes. Such outcomes can violate the basic assumptions of linear regression models, and so we can't use them. So for example, what would it mean? Drinking a glass of red wine each night reduced your chance of dying by 0.1 units of death. Well, actually, to be honest, it can make sense, but for various reasons, it's not a good way to do it. And I'll go into why that is. There are a few, we'll go into some of the, how a logistic regression is better in a second. The big ones are basically that it turns out that there are 2 really big things that are wrong with estimating against a scale that goes from 1 through to 0. 1, right, there's the probability, right? One is that, I mean, there's quite a few different problems, but one is that it's limited, right? But regressions tend to sort of assume that it can go off in either direction a lot further, right? So Lee had a model and it said that people would go up to 2.6 units of re-election on a 0 to 1 scale. It violates that sort of assumption. The second one is that because it's bounded and also it turns out that if, and we'll deal with this in a second, if you go up by 10 units, I'd say 10% at this point, which would be a 0.1 movement, and you go up by 10% here, they are completely different things, right? To move from a 50% chance to a 60% chance, yeah, it's bad, not that bad. Move from a 90% chance to a 100% chance is actually a gigantic transformation, right? So that 10% means a lot more than that 10%. And that means it's not actually linear. Probabilities don't work in a linear way. I'll show you this in more intuitive, this explained in more detail, but that's the crux of it. So it's limited, and it is not a linear actual movement, right? So 0.1 does not mean the same thing throughout it. So there are ways that statisticians deal with it. The logistic regression model and a related model called PROBIT. They're almost just to say you'll hear about PROBIT and Logit. Did a lot of research on this. They have a slightly different, what we call link function, which is sort of just like the pattern of the curve of the models, but they're basically economists tend to do PROBITs and other people do Logits. And it's personal preference and who was your supervisor that tends to determine which one you do. Okay, however, at the core of it, a logistic regression is a linear model, just like a linear regression. And so for the linear regression model, we know this is our equation. Y equals bx plus c, or y equals b1x1 plus x2, b2x2 plus b3x3, yes? We all get that? In a logit, the equation you'll often see is this, which is designed to make you freak out and think you don't understand anything, right? Probability y equals 1 equals 1 over 1 plus e up to the power of minus bx plus c. Like, no brain really understands that. What they do understand is how to transform that into something that is meaningful. So I'm going to show you what that is, but don't worry. All it actually means is, remember, y is the probability that something will happen. Y divided by 1 minus y is the odds. It's a horse racing odds. Right? So, I mean, I'm being simplistic about it, but it's true. It's a horse race. That's the odds. Log is simply a log transformation, right? So it means that you make big things, well, it's like an exponent, right? But it's simply a linear, it's a simple transformation that makes big numbers a lot smaller and small numbers a bit smaller, but not necessarily. But the point is that it's simply still y equals bx plus c, right? But it works out to have a whole lot of properties we'll see that work. So really, while this looks impossible and is really not supposed to be understandable, and more and more I look at this, I go, why does anyone ever show that? This makes a lot more sense. It simply says that some function of the probability is a linear model. Yep.
For the first one, should it be y equals to 1 or y minus 1 is 1?
No, it's y. It is the probability. So probability means that, so remember the outcome is either 1 or 0. So for a person, they're either dead or not dead. Right? So probability is the chance that you are a 1.
Okay.
The chance that you are pregnant, dead, cured, unsatisfied with your train, or satisfied with your train, right? Yep. Okay, and even more simply, it's just expressed as this: logit y equals bx plus c, which is logit means the log of the odds.
How do we?
Yeah, but we're getting to that, and I have found the best explanation on the internet for all of this. I kid you not. I really think it's. I mean, it blew my mind. It was really cool. So, but let me actually. So let's just go. Oh. This is really, let me just, I think it's here. Yeah, all right. So what I'll do is I'm going to read out the word explanation and then we'll go through it online. So this is my word in word summary of that, and then we'll go and look at it with diagrams. Even though we have a binary outcome, right? So it's either dead or not dead or whatever. We still want to say something like, for each unit increase in x, there is a b unit increase in the probability that y will happen, right? Like, that if you drink wine, you'll die in a car crash or something if you drive, right? Thus, basically the right-hand side of the equation remains the same, right? The independent variables is simply, we multiply the independent variables by a number, like x by b, and that's how it works. However, that's the left side of the equation. However, we would, for us as human beings, we want it to be the probability of an event. It makes a lot more sense to us, right? Rather than, But when we consult our mathematical friends, my summary of it, there are two problems with just making y a probability straight up, right? As I said, the outcome should not have bounds, so it shouldn't be limited by 1 and 0. And secondly, the variable value should increase linearly across the whole range of values. So, the 10% movement here should be at 0.1, 10% movement here should be the same as a 10% movement here. That number, that 0.1, should mean the same thing. Okay. Our mathematical friends, however, have found a solution, which is to undertake two transformations, which we'll see how this works with numbers in a second. The first one is that you transform the probability into an odds. So an odds is simply the chance that something happens divided by the chance it won't happen. So if I can let's just do a couple of odds so this makes sense to you. So what's something what's a binary thing that might happen to you?
So we don't lose at a sports game?
Yeah, okay, win or lose a sports game. Yeah, right. So what's the chance that you will win at soccer on the weekend or cricket on the weekend?
Basketball.
67%.
Okay, so the probability of win basketball is equal to 0.67. Yep. We can transform that into an odds. The odds of winning at basketball this weekend is equal to remember what the equation is? It's y, which in this case is p, over 1 minus y, which is 0.67 over 1 minus 0.67, right? Is that right? Close. Just putting this up. Yeah? Which is equal to 0.67 over 0.33, which is equal to 2. Right, so a 67% chance of you winning on the weekend is the same as saying the odds is 2. Yeah, which actually makes sense because 67, the chance of you winning is 67, the chance of you not winning is 33, which is 2 to 1. Miss, it's a lot of maths to do that, right? Now we can keep doing that for anything in the world, and we can get to odds. Turns out that's pretty cool.
Yes. So how do we interpret the result into the actual outcome? Like,
Can we get to that in a second? Is that all right? So the way you end up dealing with all of this is you tend to find that expressing it as odds is the way to think that people report most of these results. Yeah, because that's sort of like intuitive, right? Yep. The next thing is, however, it's not perfect. It doesn't go from infinity to minus infinity. Odds go from 0 through to infinity. Ugh.
That's weird.
But if you take the log of the odds, it turns out it goes from 0 to infinity, and it also happens to transform it so that it has a really nice property that 1 unit increase happens to be the same in each case. The same unit increase in the log odds means the same thing at any value. So let's just take a quick look at that, and this is why this thing is so cool. So here we have, this is the probability and the odds of the first transformation. So we have a probability of 0.1, we have an odds of about 0.01, blah, blah, blah. We get up to 5, so 50% chance, the odds is 1, and we start going up. So where were we, 65, or 6.7, that's where you were, etc. Right? And then we can, and that looks like this. So as probability goes up, the odds goes towards infinity. Yep. And then we can take the log of the odds, and this is what happens to those numbers. So the log of the odds, 0.5, when nothing's happening, 0, and then you can see how the numbers drift off in each direction. So where were you? You were about there. So the log of the odds would be 0.8. Whatever. This number is inherently arbitrary. That's what's reported in yours, and it's inherently non-intuitive. It has good properties for maths. It is bad properties for humans.
So I guess
right?
bookmakers would use this kind of thing for making it.
They might. What they would use it for estimating models of things like that. So they would take all the horses' last races, and they would take the nature of the track. They would have regression models of all that stuff. You do this for real. You could make money. There's a guy in the department here, who's in a really different department to what you expect. He's a really rich guy because he used regression models to understand the real estate market.
I've got a friend that he did some stats course or something, and he's working with somebody making models for NBA and tennis, and he through probably something like this I didn't know before, but yeah, his company just invests based on models and when there's a certain value point.
Exactly. So you could take all the data, and if you could get all stock market data and correlate it with New York Times reports and Trump tweets and all this sort of stuff, that's how people do a lot of making money, yeah? Or looking at underlying really substantial variables in the economy, like how, wages are moving, or real estate is moving, or how the Chinese economy is moving, or whatever, yeah? So anyway, point is, you use that to do your mathematical models, but you use this if you're a human and you're trying to understand it, right? Or you could even transform it to probabilities as well, for one particular instance. Yes? Lee, you look like you're going to ask a question. No?
No.
Are you understanding?
But why is P instead of Y?
It's the same, because it's exactly the same thing. It's just that
P for probability.
P for probability. So actually I should have transformed. Y, it's true. Y is a binary variable. P is the probability of Y. Yeah, so I'll call it P. Yeah? Good? Blah, blah, blah. That's the main point, actually. That's yeah? Did you get that, Milana? That's the really core thing, which just screws everybody up, I've got to say. But actually, if you take it slowly, you step through it, I think we can all broadly get it, right? Yeah.
Again, just say this 2. What does this 2 mean?
That means that
in reality, in the case of winning basketball.
okay, yeah, for sure. So I've done a little sleight of hand here.
So,
No, yeah.
doesn't mean the winning and losing is like 2 to 1.
So this is actually, so I'm going to,
Like out of every 3 games, you would win 2 and lose 1.
that's right, that's broadly speaking correct, yeah. There is actually a slight difference, right? So what we might do, and just to be simplistic about it, let's say everyone plays a game on the weekend and everyone has a chance of it, winning or losing, right? If we wanted to ask the question, how does, let's just pick gender because it splits us about in half, right? How does gender affect your probability of winning or losing on the weekend? That would start to become a regression question. Yes? And so each of you would have odds of winning soccer on the weekend, or cricket, or basketball, or whatever it is you play. Yes? And each of you has a gender. Correct? And so actually what the logistic regression does, and this is where I know your brains are going to melt, and I shouldn't point this out, but I'm just going to point it out anyway. That what's actually reported is not the odds, but the odds ratio.
What?
Right? Which is the odds of winning for women, for example, over the odds of winning for men. Right? So let's say the women are, on average, the odds of a man winning on the weekend is, say, 50%.
What if you just use the 2?
So the probability, let's just do this. No, let's just, the probability of a man, which is the same as an odds for P men, which is equal to an odds of 1. Right? Correct? The probability of a woman winning on the weekend is, say, 0.75. Oh no, let's do 6-7 because it's easier, right? 6-7. Yeah? Which transforms, we know, into an odds for woman of 2. Yeah? Which just is really saying 1 to 1 and 2 to 1. Okay? Or 1 to 2, whatever. Yeah. Then the odds ratio becomes the odds of woman winning, which is equal to 1 divided by the odds of a man winning. No, sorry, other way around. Sorry. Odds of a woman winning 2 over odds of a man, the man winning 1. So the odds ratio becomes 2. Right, so 1, 2 divided by 1 is 2. And then the way you interpret the independent variable, this is why I say you write it out, is you say that if someone is a woman, they have got twice the odds, or 2 times the odds, because it's a 2, of winning on the weekend that a man does.
So this does not mean women
Win twice as often.
Yeah.
No, because women win 67% of the time and men win 50% of the time.
So this is about odds.
It's about odds, right? And it turns out the reason we talk in odds is just because they have nice mathematical properties, right? And if I can quote a statistician friend of mine, and people think they understand it. Yeah?
So anyway, this is not how we usually explain something. It's just some mathematical.
It is kind of that, yes. The way that there's a very close thing to this called the risk ratio, which is the risk of something happening if you're a woman and the risk of something happening if you are a man, which would like be 0.67 over 0.5. And that would be much more intuitive, to be honest, right? That would be, and that would transform into a number, whatever, that would transform into something that we would really think. Like for every one man who has this, 1.6 women will win. Right?
Like insurance companies might do something.
That's called the risk ratio. And it is almost identical to the odds. It's just that the difference is for risk, the risk is P over total. Now, it's the risk of P over P plus 1 minus P, which is basically 1. Right? So the probability of something happening over the probability of everything possible happening. Yeah? So that's how we really think about it. There is a strict relationship between these two, between risk and odds, between odds and P, and this and log odds and all those sorts of things. Just turns out that odds ratios do really good maths. And so everything gets reported in.
How do you write about this finding?
So I just said it. So but the way this is where I went back. The way you write about it is you go and look at someone else who's written about it, and who in a good job and copy their words, or go and find the statistics manual. But the way it is generally expressed is this: that in this case it would be the odds of a woman winning on the weekend are twice those of the odds of a man. Yeah. Yeah. Or being a woman doubles your odds. Right? Which everyone thinks they understand, but it's a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
But it's actually...
The same as saying doubles the probability.
It's not quite. Right? Because actually it's gone from 0.5 to 0.67. But doubles what does even double the probability mean? Like 0.5 to 1? Is that a doubling?
No.
It's not, right? So that's the problem, that actually probability nothing works like the way that people think it does. These numbers don't quite work that way. Yeah? So like if you look at things like they actually stopped the estrogen pill, right, for menopause. Like there was they stopped a massive trial on estrogen pill because a certain number of people.
Breast cancer.
Yeah, or breast cancer or slime. I don't even know whether it was that, but it wasn't. Yeah, there were certain things there was a risk of. I think it was heart attacks, but there weren't that many people that died, but it did increase the probability a bit. So I think maybe out of 10,000 people, 10 more people died or something. Yeah, but it was significant.
But my concern is sometimes when I write an anthropology paper, I will reference some quantitative research. They have regression models, and I only want their conclusions or their findings. But if they reporting this way, it's a little bit difficult to say translate it into an expression that has nothing to do with math. In order to
Okay, so the way you do it is you infer it for two cases, for two examples. So so you could say what you would do is to say something like the odds of a woman are twice those of a man, which translates to the fact the average woman will have a 67% chance of winning on the weekend. An average man has a 50% chance of winning on the weekend.
Go back to probability.
You do, yeah, because people get that probability. People really get when you've got comparing the two. But even if you express it as a risk ratio, people wouldn't understand it, right? If you have the ratio of that to that. Yep.
That happened.
There is no, I don't know why that happens. Okay, are we good? Doing well? So this is apparently another good example from UCLA. Let's look at what it is.
Which page?
Whatever, I'm not interested in that. I'm going to move on. Holy hell. So I think the next... So odds ratios... So yeah, this is an example of a paragraph where it is reported. So controlling for, and I'm just putting this here to show you this is how it's reported. Right? Controlling for all other factors, the odds of suffering from a serious mental illness were 5.7% higher, confidence interval 2 to 20, for migrant workers threatened with deportation, as compared to those not threatened. Yeah? Well, okay, I mean, but you can see it there. It's not, yeah. And I think this is the same thing. This is the same thing that we've already looked at. I think it is. Yeah, it is. All right, I'm just going to keep going. We're now moving on to something completely different, or path analysis, which we've actually already discussed. Yes,
Sorry.
before we move on from Logit, is there anything you want to understand?
But I think there is a question to start with before we do this part. Does dependent variable have to be binary?
Or in a logistic regression?
Binary for path analysis?
No.
No. Okay. So
you can use whatever.
Okay.
They're not connected. The reason we're doing path analysis is just because it's about time to touch on it, and it happens to be done in that same paper that uses all logits. So, but we're now moving to a completely new topic. You would generally, for sort of these sorts of path analysis, do regressions of some kind. It's always easier if all the arrows are measured in the same way. What actually people do, just to say, if you're doing a path analysis with linear regression, you'll often transform all the values on the arrows to standardized beta, right? Because the standardized beta is effectively a really nice effect size measure that makes them all the same, or all comparable. Yeah. Are we good? Can I keep pushing ahead? So, if you look at figure 2, the final path diagram for the models, there are these series of questions. What do the arrows represent? What do the numbers represent? What does it mean when an arrow is solid or dotted? Why are there not all arrows between all boxes? What does it mean that an arrow points in the middle of another arrow? And where is model 2 in this figure, model 3 and model 4? So let's just look at this. So that's the model. Oh. What's people's favorite pop song at the moment? Does it actually people listen to pop music? Here we go. What does an arrow mean?
Correlation. Let's say impact.
It's assumed causation. It's a correlation that's assumed to be causation. Yeah. These are all odds ratios, right? So Bangladeshi doubles your chance of serious mental illness.
Does that mean you're going to do path analysis for logistic?
No, you can't. So this is why I said you would often use standardized beta. You could actually do path analysis with, you can put whatever number you want, right? So this could be measured in K6, and you could have you know, one Bangladeshi raised into a K6 by 3 points or something. Yep. Yes.
But there are 5 models in the last page.
Well, there's 5 models, but one of them is the null model. The first model is all these on this, right? So it's a sense, if we don't take account of any of the mediating and moderating mechanisms, if we just say really basic stuff in life, screws up your mental health. So and then we have 4 real models that are actually the path analysis. Yep.
So for this 2, which model is from?
Which one?
Which model is 2 from? Bangladeshi.
That's a very good question. I don't want to answer that because you should be starting to be able to work that out.
Yeah, but I think it's from model 2 because it's like 1.99, 2 stars.
Yeah, what?
And the model including.
Where is it? Bangladeshi. There it is. Yes. So it turns out that this is our null model. Sorry, this is our null model, model 1, and these are the models 2 through to 5 are the ones that are included in there. Yeah, I've actually I know what I can do. Let me just go back. If you go to the website, oh, you bugger. Oh, here it is. On the website, I actually put them all up. Okay. You can't quite sort of see that? Not really? Yeah. So the questions were, what does an arrow represent? An arrow represents basically statistically significant relationship between 2 variables. Yes? Arrows point at the dependent variable. So, serious mental illness, which model is it? Model 2, it's not the first one because that's our control. Yeah, 1.99 rounded to 2 decimal points, to 2 significant figures is 0.2. Correct, you're right. Huh? You said 1.99 and 2, that's what it is, yeah.
But what about age? Age.
So yeah, that's a very good question. Age here is 0.98. But where's the arrow from age to mental health, serious mental illness? Where is it? Nick, you fucked up. I did it. Why? How do you know I didn't screw up? Huh? Model 3? No, it's not model 3. We're just going to talk about model 2. Why is there not an arrow of 0.98 from age to serious mental illness?
Adding something.
You're right.
Yeah, okay. It's not statistically significant.
It's not statistically significant. There's no star next to it, and the confidence interval includes 1.
So
right?
where's the 1.1 from?
Which 1.1?
Age to injury dispute.
Which one? It's the injury dispute one.
Here,
See?
injury dispute 1.07, round to 2 decimal points. Significant. I thought I made a mistake. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Andrew was right.
Huh?
So he was.
Who was that?
You're right. In the beginning.
So did you draw that in R and you could just have a
No,
code
I drew this in like Word or something.
Well, I thought maybe you had a code like, oh, we draw arrows.
There is actually, the thing is, I have looked into lots of different software that draws this, and none of them are actually that good, unfortunately. I mean, well, there is network diagrams, but yeah, we could, yeah.
Someone needs to write some code.
Someone needs to write some code to make some really pretty path diagrams. But yeah, it turns out they're just laying it out yourself. What does the dotted arrows mean?
Negative.
Thank you. Not everyone can read a graph. Yeah, dotted lines represent negative relationships. But even if they weren't dotted, how would you know that they were negative? This is revision.
Below 1.
Huh? They're below 1. They're significant below 1. 0.3 negative. 0.9 negative. 0.3 negative.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Cool.
But
Yes.
in our practice, there are not any what those on top of the outcome variables. We didn't quite set up outcome variables for those models we just ran. Did we? Like we just created like 5 models in the
Yes.
first half of the class. So what are outcome variables for those?
Those models use these. This is they were included in the data set. Outcome variable? Oh.
No, I mean in those models,
Yes.
they don't really have what we have.
Oh yeah, that was just because of the names I put. I just called them Model 1, Model 2, Model 3, Model 4. But I could have called them loads of serious mental illness. I could have called them whatever. That's just in the code there.
Why?
Yes.
Is that the path graph?
Yes.
Is that output from R?
No, I laid it out in Word or something, or PowerPoint. I think PowerPoint's quite good for pictures, actually.
But just say, why is model 3 injury dispute?
Why?
Why is it that way? Because simply it's using same variables as model 1.
Okay, yeah, look, that's a really good question. But what's the dependent variable for each of them? The outcome variable.
Okay. So it's not.
So let's just go through it. I think you're going to get. So this says, as you get older, do you get more seriously mentally ill? Right? Not significant. This says, as you get older, are you more likely to have an injury dispute? Significant, yes. So this is just saying what is the impact of these with, or the correlation of these with these various outcomes.
Okay, so outcome variable is the
Dependent
variable.
Yes.
Alright.
Yeah. Sure. Good, yes.
How do you know you?
Oh, you're very smart. Very, very smart. This one here, this is weird. What does an arrow pointing at a bloody arrow mean? And there's another one here, arrow pointing at a bloody arrow. Does anyone know?
So maybe to the final one.
Mediating, moderating. I always get them mixed up, the words, so not the concepts. So it turns out, we're going to learn this in a second. Can I rub this out? Is that okay? So it turns out there are two really, so A can affect B. A effect on B, this is called a main effect. M-A-I-N. It's most of what we've been thinking about so far. Yeah? We can also have A affects B through C. This is a mediating effect. Mediate. You know, a third person mediates, the effect of someone mediating. Yeah? However, there's another type of effect which is called, which we express like this, which is a moderating effect. Now, I've been thinking about it and I actually think there's a much simpler way to draw this. When you see that, what you should think is that it's not always the case, but most of the time, this moderating variable is binary. And if it's significant, what it means is there are really two paths. A with C equal to 1 and A with C equal to 0, which each have different relationships to B. Now that looks all very abstract, but let's say this is the effect of having an injury on a man and the injury on a woman, right? Right? Or in this case over here, there's really two paths. If you have had an injury dispute and you're threatened with deportation, the effect on your mental health is not as bad as for those who had not had an injury dispute. What that really reflects is the fact that they're already very fucked up. Like having an injury dispute really screws up your mental health and makes you very high chance of being threatened with deportation. And so there's some sort of like ceiling effect going on. You can't, which reduces it a bit. Whereas if you didn't have an injury dispute, say you were just you're just a regular worker and your boss says, shape up or I'm shipping you out, you fall apart. You go from like 10% to 50% chance. Right? Whereas if you've had an injury dispute, you're already at about a 30% chance and you go up to 60% chance or something like that. Yes?
So the value of, and the little cross means to multiply by.
Which cross? That's a significant.
In the table?
Oh, yes. So I've got no idea why that happens. It's a new thing for me. So this moderating variable is also called an interaction effect. And whereas we measure mediating variables by just throwing them into our model of B. So we'll throw in a model of B and say, what's the effect of C on B? Well, we've still got the effect of A on B. So this one is easier to do. You just chuck the variables in. For this, what you have to put in is, you have to put in the main effect, A. So let's say, sorry, just getting messy. For this, you put in so we're modeling outcome B, and we have one variable which is A, another variable which is C, and then we also have the variable A times C. And this, right, and these each have values. Yep, it's a bit, this is too abstract. Let's try and make it much more concrete. Can I go through the examples on the website for a second? If we move over to there, it'll make much more sense. But in this case, the interaction effects are having an injury dispute and being threatened with deportation, having a salary dispute and being threatened with deportation. The main effect threatened with deportation, main effects for injury dispute and salary dispute. Yes? No. Okay. So, this I think will help it solidify in your mind. I try to make these funny. The first, is there a direct effect, is the direct effect. Variable A on variable B. We generally think of when we say A caused B. So Samantha's punch, A, causes James's nose to bleed, B. Yeah? Or parents' income, A, increases the likelihood of a person becoming a medical doctor, B. Yep? And actually an artist too, for different reasons. The indirect effects of A on B through C. So this is a mediation, yeah, a pathway. So Samantha's punch A causes James's nose to break, C, which causes James's nose to bleed. Right, so it's actually the breakage of the nose that causes the bleeding, per se. And if his nose didn't break, then it probably wouldn't bleed. Parents' income increases the likelihood a childhood attends private school, C, which increases their likelihood of becoming a medical doctor. Yep. So it's the income leads to schooling, the schooling leads to the doctor. Okay, moderation. This is when somehow variable C changes the relationship between A and B. So let's say C is women's strength. If a woman punches a man, A, and the woman has great strength, the man's nose tends to bleed. Right? And if she does not so strong, it tends not to bleed. Right? So we think of strong or not strong. Yeah? Or maybe the parent's income combined with the child's motivation to study interact together to increase the chance of becoming a medical doctor. So you could put lots of money in, but if the kid is not very motivated, then maybe your money goes nowhere. Yep.
So whether C is mediation or moderation, it depends on theories, right?
Yeah, it does. It depends on theory. It depends on the real world. It depends on what's going on in the real world. Yep. What it really is, so moderation is there a different level of this sort of this effect at different levels of the moderator? You know, yeah, mediation is that does actually most of the change between A and B really get explained by the variation in C caused by A? Yeah, and C caused by B, caused by B. Good? Good. Then it's also worth noting there's a couple of others as well as these, but this is the main one. There's also the possibility that C causes both A and B, right? And that's called spuriousness. That's when something's not actually happening. So when people get angry, they tend to punch things, and their blood pressure rises, leading to nosebleeds, right? But the punching doesn't lead to the nosebleeds. It's the, getting angry. And adults who are ambitious and driven tend to have higher incomes, and children who are medical doctors. Right? No, they're all plausible. I mean, that's the thing about sociology. They say if you're a social scientist, you should be able to think of a million different mechanisms, multiple different ways to relate, 3 variables. Yeah? I mean, it's the... This is sort of a culture argument. Okay, so then these are my advice for doing path analysis. There are complex versions of these things called structural equation modeling and mediation analysis. They're sort of just putting what we've already done together with some path analysis and some testing for significance and so forth. But we're not going to go there, but having done this, you're really in a place to start reading more if you need to. The main guidelines I would say are these for doing a path analysis. One is logic, theory, and assumptions determine the direction of the arrows. We've sort of discussed this already, but because you asked, if you're doing cross-sectional data, then you need a logical and theoretical basis for choosing them, and also which ones are independent versus dependent, which are mediating, etc. Right? I guess we've already talked about that. Do you have questions about that? Arrows normally only go in one direction. Look, they can go in both directions, but then it's not really, often it's not that useful. if you're trying to explain something. Generally, you're trying to explain something that's happening. So if you've got arrows going in both directions, that's not a good sign. Normally, you can't have cycles. So if A causes C causes B and B causes A, this is reinforcing. And so path diagrams are generally said to be acyclic, A meaning not cyclic. Because forward-feeding loops makes everything dependent on each other. As we've said already many times, variables with arrows pointing at them are dependent variables in a regression model. Interaction effects are when a variable points in the middle of another arrow. That's how it's represented. Remember, there are two types of diagrams. This should be 6 and 7, but there's the diagram of all potential relationships, which actually becomes really messy really, really quickly, right? If we drew in all potential relationships here, it would just start to look terrible. Yeah? Right? You can see where I'm going here, just as it becomes an absolute mess. Yeah, so we don't tend not to do it. Generally what we do is all statistically significant relationships. And actually, we've already done the example. I was going to get us to go through this. I guess just note again, things always start with theory. Well, it's broadly true, at least in an explanation. You know, this is our mental model of what was going on, and it's a gross simplification, but it helps for us, for the audience, to explain and for us to think about it. We've then gone through and operationalized it. This is our model that we ran in R, and this is, which is with slightly modified data. That's the models that we ran that were in the paper, and we end up with this nice diagram at the end. Yeah. That's a very good question. I think that might be right. It might be the same. You know?
What was the question?
Yeah, it's true. He's right. It's like, why does that arrow go to that and not be this arrow to this? And there's no reason. Because they're both binary. If one was not binary, like what's this? No, we don't have any. If one of them was like, if it was like normally it would be the binary one pointing at the non-binary one, like the continuous one. Say this threat with deportation was fear on a scale of 1 to 10. Fear. And this is injury dispute 1 or 0. Then you would always have the interaction going to the one that is continuous, because these would represent two different levels of that. But you're right. Actually, you could point it the other way. I don't think there's a good reason. Very smart. Do you guys get that? Because this is really just this one here is the interaction, that times that. Well, there's no reason why it needs to be represented as that. It could be represented as that. Yep.
It sounds like it's just a matter of reasoning, which causes which.
But it's more just convention, because the point is these three have to be interpreted together. If you've got both these things, then you need to include that in it, in accounting for it. Yes? Do you have more? Yeah?
Is it the output or
No, it's not the upload. I laid this out in Word or PowerPoint and stuff like that. So I just laugh because like you're about the 5th person to ask today. Everyone wants to know this. It's fine. It's a good question. I'm glad you asked. Everyone, R does not do this yet. But I wish it would. I just drew it. In fact, my first version of it had curly, I just sort of did curly. Yeah, and my co-authors are like, Nick, that's ugly. Yes, you can. Your questions are good. Go.
So, you put the yeah, I want to ask, why if you use this two variable, you cannot put it together?
It's a really good question. I think the reason was because they were so collinear. Basically what was going on was that, I think if you go back, you'll see that almost all of the people who've got debts are the claimant workers. And all of the ones, so it turns out that this and this are almost the same. And when we put them in the model together, you get that thing where you have two highly correlated variables. And then I think what was going on was neither of them was significant, or it was even making them, and because it inflated the standard errors. So yeah, this is a case of where I haven't included the main effect, but it was simply because it was so correlated.
Yeah, I think sometimes the sign can even change if you've got two highly correlated variables.
Yeah.
The expected relationship, one of them will actually turn negative or what you would expect.
And it doesn't make sense. They can all only be interpreted with the other one. So this one is okay too, because if you think about it, this covers every case. These still cover every case. You're just not separating out the effect of uncleared fees.
So how can I know when should I use this?
Path analysis?
Yeah, because in the model 2 and 5 you divide this variable into ordinary workers and
Yeah, why do I split it for two?
for these two models or just every model?
I think the reason was because, because this is the dependent variable. Very close to the injury dispute is like being a claimant worker. So you can't have the independent variable being the dependent variable. So claimant worker means a worker with an injury dispute or a salary claim. So to predict injury dispute, you can't have injury dispute. Because I'll show I'm here. No, it's a really good question. If you did that, we're going to just draw this, right? It would be like having a variable that looks like that, with interaction with debt. Because it's not quite the same, but this here, claimant worker means worker who's made a claim, which is half the data set. There's all the ones who are one for these. So if you put it, you wouldn't, so yeah.
So claimant workers include injury and salary.
That's what it is, yeah. So claimant worker is one, because what we did, we had to sample on this dependent variable. We had to sample, so we surveyed half the workers who were at a soup kitchen and half the workers who, like, you know what a soup kitchen is? Like, they got free meals, breakfast and dinner, right? And half the workers who were just regular workers who had jobs and on the street, were fine and working, yeah. So that's the short answer. Does that make sense now?
So,
Yeah.
for linear model, do we need dependent variable being the same for all the models? Is there a difference? Like for this one, we can have different dependent variables for different models, but for linear regression.
No, so you could do, so no, I think you got to distinguish completely the two parts of this, right? So we did logistic regression, we did path analysis. You could do path analysis, logistic regression, one condition, binary dependent variable.
Okay.
Yes or no as the outcome. 1 or 0 is out. Path analysis, any type of regression, any dependent variable or whatever.
Okay, so for linear regression, we can also have.
Yes,
say,
yeah. Yeah, and if you did, you would probably put those are coefficients, the standardized beta. Remember standardized beta? It was like a correlation coefficient for the relationship, which means it was just standardized. So no matter what you measure it in, it has the same. It's one standard deviation of income affects one standard deviation of the outcome variable.
So just comparing the standard.
Stable is the same, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I am finished.
No,
We
that's
too.
We did well though, I think. We really did. You agree?
No, it's great. It was a lot of things.
You got it?
Yeah. I still,
Yeah, some like difference and all that.
that's right. I'm still not quite clear on what it actually gets you.
Oh, that's a good question. Why do you do this?
Yeah.
No. So the short answer, yeah, why would you do path analysis? That's a really, let's start with that. Why do you do path analysis? The reason you say why do you do path analysis is because we care not only what correlates with what, but why it correlates, or how, the better question is how it happens. We call this mechanisms. So again, this is a mechanism.
Yeah.
A mediates, C is the way that A affects B. So in this case, we show, right? Like I'll give you, in this case, oh, there's all these workers who've got their arms ripped off. No wonder they're depressed, right? What we show is that, oh no, it's not that their arm, well, I mean, that's exaggerating, right? But some of them do. But, it's not that they had their thumb ripped off or they had a back injury or whatever. It's also that they had a back injury and someone told them, I'm going to send you back to Bangladesh, right? That's a really important point because this distinguishes between what is at some level, even though injury is actually a social phenomenon, injury, something that's a little bit objective versus something that is completely within the realms of the law, realms of society, realms of norms, and is anti-normative. Threaten a sick person with deporting them to a third world country.
Yeah.
So, and you could pull it apart, right?
Okay.
Yep.
But again, why do we do logistic regression? I mean, you could have used K6 core as dependent variable.
Because I called the guy in Harvard and he said it's the best way to report the results. No, really, it's true. Because it's a much better to, because I could say the odds go up by 8.
Right. But just say the outgoing and replicating dependent variable is suicidal stability. But why don't I transform suicidality into a binary variable, say it's a high or low suicidality? And
Yeah. So you would make that decision on the basis of two things. One is like communication, right, which I've talked about, like how you can explain your results. The second one is kind of mathematics and rigor. Which one is a better model of the world, right? Which one keeps your information and operates best? And actually, to be honest, you know what you're supposed to do? You do both of them. You pick one to put in your paper and you put the rest in some online appendix. Right? And if they don't get the same results, then you're screwed. Right? They should both say broadly the same thing. Emma.
I was going to ask, so the way that you know that your theoretical model or mechanism is correct is just that you do this path analysis and find the
No.
numbers are going in the
No.
in the direction that
No, I mean, it's fine, but no. The short answer is the way you know is because you can use something outside of the model to justify it. It's the short answer. So you need to make an argument for every step there.
Yeah, but say like if you just the reason you're doing this is to test your own theoretical model and say that that's what it was or
Yeah.
what you had at the beginning. And then once you do this analysis and then you can make the one with all the numbers, then is that showing that your initial theoretical model is correct in some ways? No.
It does and it doesn't, right? It shows the correlations, which you didn't know before were there. It doesn't show the direction of the arrow. So,
That's still theory.
right? It doesn't show the types, it doesn't show that the controls were appropriate, that you controlled for all the important things, that you needed to control for the things that you did. All that stuff is where, and that's where, like, if you go to academic conferences or you get academic reviews, people are just brutal. The way you attack someone is just tear to shred their assumptions.
So it's not really testing causality.
No,
This
is not a proof of causality.
Yeah.
This is a proof of a correlation.
Yeah.
But that correlation in the context of my argument that this is the right model, right, where I can back up every single assumption that lies behind it, which, you know.
So it's a quantity theory, but it doesn't.
It is a further evidence for it. Yeah, that's right. It's further evidence for it. And to the extent that there is not a plausible other explanation and that there is evidence for each of the different steps in it and the assumptions, yeah. But really, like, the way you back it up is you make logical arguments, like I did before, that, you know, being depressed doesn't make you Bangladeshi. It doesn't, you know, or whatever. Those sorts of things, which you can generally assume.
So it's more of the explanatory power of that. Is it?
Well,
Well, I suppose it goes beyond that, because you've got you've got the coefficients.
this is, I think the way you think about it is to say that you make an argument for this, sort of just the same way you would in a debate, or, you know, just a logical proof or whatever, right? It's fair to say this is the arrows because of this, this, and this, right?
It's pretty sophisticated.
Sophisticated, right? But it's a sophisticated model that is reasonable to assume. And maybe, and even you can, if there are ones that are controversial in there, you throw in a few references to an academic article to say other people have shown that it tends to be construction that causes injuries, not injuries that cause construction, right? Or whatever it is, right? So my assumption has been shown by other people who've looked at this more closely, you know? And we said we went and talked to people and all their stories fit this causal pattern, right? No one's had stories that said I was depressed and therefore I got injured. Yeah, so you use all these things together to make the argument, and then you can run the maths. And the maths just tests one tiny little part of it in a sense.
Yeah, but it builds.
It builds, yeah. Adios. Thank you.